Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Dr. Earl W. Flora, author of Then They Were One. Dr. Earl, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. So question number one, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, it took me 30 years to write this one, so I think the word would be tenacity. Don't give up. If you've got a good idea, it's your idea, and you stick with it. And stay with it until you get to wherever you feel that you can publish it. So I've stuck with this and for 30 years, and finally it was that time, sort of like a seed sprouting and then bearing fruit. It's going to go. It's just natural process. And I think writing books is just as natural as nature. Stay with it.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I'm sorry that I'm laughing.
Oh, you're good.
It's well, in my case, it was almost impossible because I am a licensed clinical psychologist with a doctoral degree, and I couldn't get major publishers to, even though I filled out long forms and explained everything, I couldn't even get them to acknowledge that I sent anything to them. So I don't recommend that neophytes out there go that route. I was able to find someone online who did that. I'm not going to mention the name, but at a relatively inexpensive but I did a lot of research myself, and I know that you are a publisher, but I ended up self-publishing. This was the only way at that point that it would work for me, where I could control it. And also that way I knew how many books were being sold since I marketed around the world.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Okay. Well, what's worked well for me is LinkedIn, because it is the categories, you can categorize who you want to market it to. Well, obviously, in my case, I wanted to market it to mental health professionals that do clinical work. And so at this point, I have 12,000 LinkedIn connections, literally in every country of the world, that know about my book. And I've sold books in Australia, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, France, England, several other countries around the world. But everybody knows about my book, even though they may or may not be interested enough to purchase it. And that's worked for me very well.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Well, my favorite book actually got an A for me in the 9th grade English class, and it was The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. And why I got an A is because and honestly, I'm a fisherman myself, so it wasn't very hard to really get caught up in Hemingway. But I said, well, this is a book I will read again. So I throw that out there, and anybody who wants to get an A for reading, just tell them you want to read it again. But it was the truth. And what I learned from it, I think I've already said, is what kept me in this writing this book for over 30 years and validating it. It's very complicated to do a professional scientific book. You have to validate it also, not just the storyline. But the word that I said before is tenacity. Just stick with it. And boy, is he a story of tenacity. The Old Man and the Sea, if the listeners are aware of it. If not, I suggest you read it. It's a story of courage and tenacity, and that's I think the thing that's the message I got, and I think it pretty well describes my life.
And for a final
Don't give up.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Well, I'm a person of faith, and I believe in the divine intervention, and think it probably is the reason I was able to publish the book I did. And it's all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. All things work together for good. And that's sure true in my life. So that's my favorite quote.
Well, Dr. Earl, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show today. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Well, LinkedIn is the best way. But I do have a website, which is the EWF at EWFasFnow.com. That's my website, or you can check me out on LinkedIn with just my name, Earl W. Flora.
Well, Dr. Earl, thank you once again. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say my credentials are Doctor of Psychology, which is actually abbreviated PSYD. So, thank you for the opportunity, Paul.
Dr. Earl, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you, Bruin. Same to you.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.